Okay, well, I think we'll probably jump in here. I'll do the little ArtEvolve spiel. It's been a while. So, is this our first one of the year? It's our first one of the year, isn't it?
It is our first one of the year. Happy New Year,
Yeah.
everyone.
Happy New Year to everybody. Yeah. And welcome back to ArtEvolve. We haven't had 3 full years, but we're now in year 3. Right?
Wow.
Right? That feels right. Yeah. So
right?
we're very excited to have you back. Maybe it's right. I've decided. I am still getting over the COVID, so if you see me muting and coughing a little bit, that is what's happening, as well as my slightly funny voice, but I appreciate you all hanging in there with me. And obviously,
we appreciate
as usual,
you
my name is
joining us despite your...
I'd love to be here. I'm very happy to be joining. And of course, my name is not Hello, it is Mackenzie. As you all know, probably by this point, you love my jokes, don't you? And I am the CCO of ArtEvolve. And of course, I have with us today, Annika. Do you want to introduce yourself?
I am Annika Eriksson, founder and CEO of ArtEvolve, as many of you may know by now. And I'm really excited to be here today with Mackenzie. It hasn't been the two of us for a little while. We kind of started off with that format a lot. And I had some good feedback about our rapport, I have to say, as well.
Oh, lovely. Well, you got a whole hour of our report today.
Woohoo! But yeah, it's been a little while since we've been in an ArtEvolve together, just because life, especially in the autumn, this last autumn, we were so mega busy that we kind of had to not be anywhere together. We had to manage everything separately, didn't we, for a long time?
That's true. We had very few meetings together. Yeah, on purpose. Yeah. So, which is good, exciting, busy, but yeah, it's nice to be in the same virtual room as you.
Yeah, definitely. Really happy to be here, kicking off 2022 with you.
Exactly.
Doing a review of 2021 and the kind of best bits from our webinar series. So I hope that this is something which is useful for everyone. I'm going to read the statement that Emma wrote because I think it's really nicely put, which is, in our first ArtEvolve after the festive break, we're talking 2021. While 2020 was the year of the unexpected, in 2021, we got used to the idea of adapting to changing circumstances. So though it was still a year full of challenges, hopefully we were better prepared to deal with them. One of our hopes for ArtEvolve is that these webinars help shine a light on some of the ways arts organizations can rise to these challenges and ensure their long-term success. Huzzah!
Yes. And so last year we actually did kind of a wrap up of the webinars of 2020 in just like a kind of an email out blog format. And that's what we kind of did at the end of the year, beginning of 2021. And that had a really good reception. So this year we decided that we would actually do a webinar, kind of doing a review of them as well, as our kind of first webinar of 2022. So we're going to talk about kind of like a whole bunch of different topics, but first we'd kind of like to know what all of you in the audience have focused on during last year, during 2021. So I'm going to pull our poll up here. And so, which of these topics did your organization focus on in the last year? And you can choose more than one. Did you focus on innovative art technologies for your organization? Did you focus on sort of more like project management technologies for optimizing your organization? Anything from Microsoft Word to things like Monday or ClickUp. Did you really focus on shipping and art movement? I think a lot of you probably did. Sustainability, was that something more important for your organization, or things like e-commerce, or professional art community and networking? Is that something important to you or your organization this past year?
Yes, intriguing. What have people focused on last year? And I also wonder what they are planning to focus on this year. So maybe a little later on, people can share with us in the chat if they are planning or even now, if they're planning in 2022 to focus on any of these things that maybe they were not focusing on in 2021.
Yeah. So anyone else wants to put into the poll? Almost done, almost over. Anyone else want to put their input? Okay, great. So here we go. For those who have answered the poll, I'm going to share the results here. There you go. So it looks like big popular ones were shipping and art movement and organization technologies. Interesting. Sustainability coming up behind is third, which is great to hear. So yeah, we'll look forward to talking about some of these topics in more detail and kind of hearing your input as we go forward.
Yeah, so that makes sense.
Yeah, that does. Well, I think especially with organizational technologies, you know, a lot of institutions were really kind of just trying to scramble in 2020 in order to get things just working in some
remote working
way.
Yeah,
right. And that sort of was optimized in 2021, I think, as we kind of realized it would be a longer haul than just not a temporary situation.
Yes, and you know, I say long may working from home reign.
Yeah,
because I do love
definitely.
it. But I know, of course, it depends on the position and the role and, you know, what makes sense, obviously. But I think that even for roles where, you know, you need to be kind of with objects and in the museum, even having like 1 or 2 days at home to do the admin stuff is quite valuable, I think. So, you know, having that flexibility is really a good thing.
Yeah, definitely. So why don't we start out with innovative art technologies? We had a couple webinars on these things. The main 2 webinars that we had were art and e-commerce innovations, talking about 3D scanning, which was a conversation that I think you had, Annika, right, with Matthew Auger at Tomorrow Contemporary.
That is correct. And I thought it was a really interesting one. And it's obviously something which is ever expanding, because I actually went for a play date last week with my son to a new friend's house who has 3 kids, and her husband was doing 3D imaging of the artwork of another local friend of mine, his bronze sculptures in their garden with a camera, and he was all excited about, you know, doing this for him. And I was like, I did a webinar on that, I know about it. So so yeah, it's obviously something that is being done more and more if I'm just randomly coming across it in my personal life. But it was really interesting to hear from Matthew. He has been working, I remember, with Stephen Friedman Gallery, because that was one of our first customers. So that, you know, sticks out in my mind, that it's great that they're also supporting another kind of emerging technology company. So, you know, shout out to them for doing that. And that he was teaming up very smartly with a partner who is from like an adjacent space that has experience in this area. So interior design in this case. And so if you imagine, I mean, the main use case for this, for him at least, was for commercial galleries wanting to allow their collectors to do augmented reality to see objects, you know, how they would look in their house or in their garden, for example, with sculpture. And so I think that this is a really interesting add-on for commercial galleries, but also potentially has, you know, museum applications as well. You know, we all know that augmented reality from like an educational point of view is also quite interesting. And I think, you know, we probably have seen, I don't know if you've noticed, but it's now even an option for some things on Etsy to do augmented reality with their products, so you can see them in your house. So it's coming to the mainstream, and it makes a lot of sense for us to be able to do it with art objects, be it for kind of, you know, research and educational purposes or for commercial purchase purposes. So I think that is an interesting one, and we'll have to keep an eye and see how that, you know, progresses in the industry. The next one is how technology is changing authentication in art, was another one that I was in with Curtis McConnell and also Professor Maurizio Saracini, who people may be familiar with, is like a very, world-renowned authentication expert. He worked on, Botticelli, Da Vinci, Primavera, the big guns. This guy knows of which he speaks when it comes to authentication and forensic analysis. And so I thought it was really interesting when exploring this company, and if we might partner, et cetera, that, they had Professor Saracini behind it and, endorsing it. And also that Curtis comes from a logistics background where he worked for a company that did flower delivery, right? And kind of through the post. And so I thought that was also quite interesting from his perspective from another industry, but he had what he called a kind of midlife crisis where he became really interested in authentication in art. And Dr. Saracini has been his mentor. So that's a really interesting kind of cooperation they have going there.
Well, also, I think if you think about shipping flowers, that is pretty adjacent to shipping art in terms of being, delicate and needing to travel speedily, all sorts of things, right?
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's true. But at the same time, he still was in a position to kind of really do that in a kind of standardized, scaled, way that we have as of yet, struggled to do in the art world, although I'm sure it's coming, and he'll be, well positioned to kind of help us get there. He's actually very involved with the blockchain consortium that I'm a member of, the artwork identification standard, and they're going to help work on the prototype with us for that. So yeah, he's very very passionate bunch, very engaged in trying to make the art world better. And in fact, they sent us a little statement because I was asking them, what they might like us to say about them in a kind of sound bite for the purpose of this webinar. And they said that their kind of raison d'etre is to drive interest and engagement in artworks while protecting them and securing their identity, value, and health. So good things to try and do.
Yeah.
And they kind of identified some issues and challenges in the art world in that webinar, such as a lack of transparency, which we also talk about a lot, is a kind of issue in the art world, and money laundering, undisclosed conflict of interest, price manipulation, insider trading, lack of regulation, lack of management support, difficulties in finding and developing talent and expertise, lack of standards of professional qualifications. So lots of stuff.
Yeah. I think the thing, obviously for those of us who don't necessarily deal with authentication, we do, but for those, in the audience who don't deal with authentication on a daily basis, I think, the first thing that comes to mind is just like, oh, well, is it fake or is it not? But I think that art authentication just has such far-reaching consequences across the industry, right? That's not just whether or not this piece of art is real or not, right? And that's some of what you went into. And I'm sure, like Emma's mentioned, we're going to do a part 2 of that webinar probably at some point this year, and we'll get a chance to go into that a little bit more, kind of those farther-reaching consequences, I hope.
Yes, it's a big topic, and frankly, we did not get to the meat of it in that webinar. It was really more of a kind of introduction. So I'm sure they will be happy to join us for another session on it. So moving along, organizational technologies is the next category.
Yeah, so organizational technologies, by the way, just for everyone who's here, as we kind of whip through all of these webinars, we'll make sure that you have the links to them, right? When we send out the recording, you'll get the links to all these if you wanted to watch any of them again, or you haven't actually seen one of them and you'd like to watch it for the first time, you'll be able to. All those recordings are still available, as well as their summaries, blog summaries. So in terms of organization technologies, I think these were ones that I tended to cover, seeing as I love organization technologies so much.
You are such a big organization technology geek, and I love that about you, Mackenzie.
Yes, I am. And so actually the SEO masterclass was given by me. I love doing these masterclasses. I really want to make sure we do another one this year, at least one. We also had the social media masterclass the year before, which I think was really well received, as long as a couple other things. So what we did for this SEO masterclass is kind of, we went into the basics of SEO, defining it and kind of talking about what it is and how it works. But we also talked about it, in the context of, if you are doing SEO for an organization, right, or you've been tasked for some reason with doing SEO, it's not your specialty. How do you start to think about it, right? And a lot of it is really putting yourself into the searcher's shoes. Thinking about what is our clients looking for when they're going to search engines like Google, or looking for information on YouTube or social media channels, right? So what are they looking for, and how then, what words are they going to type in that they should then find us, right? So it's about making sure that the question matches the answer, which is you. So the searcher puts in a question into a search engine, and then you should be the answer that comes back, right? So making sure that you're matching also the right question to the right answer and all that type of information. So yeah, I mean, I think that was a pretty interesting discussion. We went into quite some detail. And
yeah, I think it's really
yeah.
hard to summarize that one,
Yeah.
because I know I was looking at it and I was thinking, I'm going to leave that to Mackenzie. but also I think it's worth saying, if you are in any way interested in SEO, and you should be, because it is the main way that people find your website. If you have a website, if you belong to an organization that has a website, which is pretty much every organization on the planet nowadays, right? Then you or your colleague ought to be interested in SEO, because this is the way people find you, right? This is the roadmap to getting people to your door. So it's an important thing that a lot of people don't know the first thing about, myself included. I'll put myself in that category. But there's a lot to it, and as you said, the basics is like, get a list, right? And put yourself in the searcher's shoes and try and make sure that is accounted for. But there was a whole lot of great tips in there. So I think that is one definitely to call out, that if people have any interest in that, they should go check out the blog for more details, right?
And there's a accompanying PDF, I think, with all of the kind of information that I gave that you can use as a bit of a guide to starting out. So yeah, that's a good place to start. And then, yeah, obviously the other piece of it too is that I think we think about search engines a lot as people finding us for the first time. But for example, if you work in museums and you have anything to do with development, then all of the people that you're reaching out to for development they're going to Google the museum. They're going to Google you, right? So you want to make sure that you're kind of controlling that information flow, even if it's going via Google or via Yahoo or via a search engine, right? You want to kind of know what people are finding about you, even if it's not the first time they've heard of you. It could be for different purposes. So it's something to kind of to think about from that perspective as well. Yeah, and so then the next, of course, is the art of crowdfunding, which I did with Emma, who, of course, is always hanging around our ArtEvolve webinars. So hi, Emma.
And she's not just some dweeb.
She's our communications manager. Yes,
always hanging around.
She also has been my communications manager for crowdfunding campaigns in the past. So that is kind of my background, is that I worked in technology for an amount of time, after being in the academic art world, and then did crowdfunding campaigns for different technology companies and software and hardware and all sorts of fun things. And Emma and I worked on a lot of those projects together. And so what we kind of talked about was putting crowdfunding into the context of the art world as a tool for fundraising, as a tool for being able to, kind of jumpstart projects that are not going to get funding from the organization for whatever reason, right? They're not going to come from the main pot, something that's really important to you, something that you really want to make sure gets done. And, as crowdfunding is also a way of not necessarily just for nonprofits, but also for-profit organizations, right? So let's say you have an exhibition or a show as a gallery that you would really like to put on, but is not something that would be, economically feasible for you, but you think would be received very well, and you really want, people to be able to access, and a lot of people will be interested in. You can do crowdfunding for those types of things too. So we talked about exhibitions, we talked about fundraising for artworks, actually the creation of artwork, conservation events, philanthropy projects, right? All sorts of things. So
can I
yeah, I think,
also just
yes,
mention
please.
that I think the Art Fund did a really great crowdfunding campaign over the course of the pandemic, and so they had like different tiers to support different projects they were raising money for, where you could get, you know, a great piece of art, you know, at different tiers. So that's kind of like an obvious one, right, for the art world. And it's interesting. I've noticed from because my partner is really into gaming, and it's a very like typical way that new games come onto the market is that they do a crowdfunding campaign, you know, where you have different tiers, you get different levels of merchandise and access, early access and stuff to the game when it becomes available. And you're essentially just buying the game, you're pre-ordering, right? And pre-ordering itself is another thing that, you know, in the gaming world is very common. And then also giving people early access, way too early, I might add, because I actually tried to play with him and his best friend last weekend, this game that was very buggy, very annoying, that they paid like a premium to have early access to. And, you know, so these kinds of ways of working, obviously it's a very techie audience that they're appealing to, market that they're dealing with, right? But I just think it's interesting to kind of learn from potentially or experiment with, because the other thing is that because of the pandemic, obviously we may need to be more creative about how we deal with fundraising. And it's also been something that is on, you know, my wish list to see for a long time, is how we can do more crowdfunding for like particular projects within arts, especially for conservation and collection care projects, because these are often really underfunded. And I really strongly feel that, you know, it's with funding, with fundraising, and also sales, you know, because we've become sales experts, like it's all about that right moment, right? And so a really great moment is when you are, as a viewer, as a lover of art, you know, in an exhibition in front of the work that is really, you know, emotionally moving you at that moment in time. That is a great moment to be like, hey, here's a kiosk of a crowdfunding appeal for a piece of art by the same artist, you know. Wouldn't you like to support that, you know, that poor artwork in need? Wouldn't you like to upgrade to a tier where you get a print of that artwork that you help save? You know, wouldn't that be nice? I really feel like that is
it doesn't require, it doesn't require like a whole, there are crowdfunding campaigns, right, for like, you know, big launches and things that, you know, if you're doing one for a really big exhibition, that might take more planning and things like that. But yeah, if you're looking at conserving like one artwork, it really can just be like a tap and go, right? Crowdfunding isn't necessarily, it doesn't have to be that complicated. It can be, you know, it just means that all sorts of people coming together and contributing a smaller amount of funding in order to reach the goal that's required for that project, right? So
right. And I would love to add that feature in Articheck in the future of reformatting condition reports to be crowdfunding campaigns, and to give that kind of tappability of, you know, in real life as well as online, of doing that. So so if anybody's interested in exploring that in the future, please be in touch, because that's something I would love to do.
Yeah, definitely.
And so demystifying APIs is the...
Yes, this was a great one, I think, mostly because I think a lot of people in the art world don't actually still don't know what APIs are. So this is an important one, especially because as we start to use more softwares during the pandemic, we also want them to talk to each other. And I've still come on, you know, I've come upon still, you know, large database systems, whether it's for museums or for galleries, that have never done an API integration with another software. And it's just kind of mind-blowing, right?
Mind-blowing to people outside of the industry, guys. Yeah, this is really basic.
Yeah, that they're not connected to anything else, right? That they don't kind of create this larger interconnected system where the softwares that are created for very specific purposes do that one purpose very well, and then connect to the main database in order to, right, be able to actually, you know, kind of create that interweb of everything that you need for the organization to function.
Well, part of the
or
problem
efficiently.
here, I think, is that a lot of people in the art world, unfortunately, still have this very antiquated idea that wouldn't it be nice to have one system that does everything? And the
Mhm.
thing is that, sorry guys, that doesn't exist, and it never
Yeah,
will.
it'd be
There's
nice,
never
but
going to
doesn't
be
exist.
one great system that does everything you want it to.
Yeah,
It will do a lot of things poorly, is what one system will do.
yeah.
And so having, very specified systems that do, like you said, one or two things really great, that connect to other things that do a few things really great, that is the future. And that is probably what you're already experiencing in your personal lives a lot. But it kind of has not really hit the art world yet in a big way. We've got an API, we've got several API partners. We're very much into this new model because it just works better in our opinions. But
By the
it
way,
is
API, just to clarify for those who weren't on that webinar, means application programming interface. It's a software that allows you to connect to other software applications. So you can connect your database to Articheck, for example, right? That's the easiest one to conceptualize here.
I like that thing
So,
that was in the blog post in terms of explaining it, that talked about how it's like a road. Where was that?
yeah. I think I made a little presentation at the beginning to kind of explain things. So yeah, APIs are like roads, while the software applications are like the cities. So the cities are separate entities and without a road, but with the road, they become a system, right? A larger system.
Well put.
Thanks. That was me, I believe. I think I wrote that many long moons ago. But yes, so yeah, I mean, I think the other thing too, if you think about APIs in the context, like you were saying, Annika, of your personal life, could you imagine having only one app on your phone that did everything?
No, you
Like
could not.
your clock, your to-do list, your calendar, everything one app. That would be
Your
a nightmare.
banking,
Your
your
banking, all
Facebook,
one app. Yeah,
your
nightmare.
social
Total
media.
nightmare. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you wouldn't even want that, right? Now that we're kind of used to having these different programs that do their one thing very well. So you wouldn't even want that for your personal life. So yeah, I hope that we can kind of move further in the direction of these larger systems that are connected by these API roads this year and going forwards.
Absolutely. And I promise you, you all have experienced APIs aplenty. You just maybe didn't realize it at the time.
Yeah, that's true. So anything from like a third-party travel website to, logging in to your Facebook account using your Gmail address, right? There's all sorts of ways.
Paying with PayPal for,
PayPal.
a product. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep, exactly. Okay, let's move on to our next section of topics, which is shipping and art movement, which is one of our big ones for the poll. So I think were both of these with you, Annika? Is that right?
They were indeed. And so I will speak to them a bit. So
Yeah.
the role of bookend couriers in safeguarding artistic heritage was with John Robinette, who has launched a company that's a network for international bookend couriers and collection management in general. And I think that this is a really useful company, network, and option for people for dealing with the kind of the toolkit, their arsenal of what they can do for various projects, right? And one of the misconceptions with virtual courier is that these kinds of things are mutually exclusive, and they're absolutely not. It makes a lot of sense to do bookend couriers with virtual courier, because the whole thing of virtual courier is just like it's a tool and a platform so that all of the different stakeholders can communicate and document in one secure online space, right? And so it makes, the whole point is that instead of one person overseeing everything, you've got multiple stakeholders, and that can be bookend couriers. And so having a local expert, first of all, I have a note here that we did a poll in this webinar which showed that 35% of the respondents had already used a bookend courier. So I would be really interested to know from the audience if anyone has used a bookend courier, how they found it, plans to use any in 2022. I think it's a really good thing to try out if you haven't already. So I'd be interested to hear your feedback. And I also think in terms of like just calling out what some of the benefits are to using a local expert, they probably have local relationships with the shippers, with the airports, with the institutions. That's really useful. They will also have local knowledge, such as the language, the political subtle situations going on, and the economic policies, and even things like the weather and how that might affect certain aspects. So they also will have specialist knowledge, and you might even take the opportunity to hire someone who is like a particular specialist of the period or the material or the artist of the loan that you're sending, so that you actually have an opportunity to get someone to have a look at it who maybe has a different perspective and maybe a really expert perspective compared with your staff that are not dissing the staff, wonderful staff, but maybe are not specialists in this particular area. So it can also be an opportunity. There's also, of course, the cost savings from the reduction in staff travel and the associated costs with that.
And then the sustainability part, right?
Yay, sustainability. Yeah. So yes, the carbon reduction. Absolutely. And so I have a note here, savings from air travel are substantial. And for example, with our virtual courier case studies so far, we've saved around 50 tons of carbon and 50,000 pounds per install and deinstall. And this would take 827 seedlings, 10 years of growth to sequester that carbon. So try and think about it in those kinds of terms. This is important, significant stuff. And when people are looking for, what can they do with sustainability, that is kind of a low-hanging fruit, I think.
So I'm curious, anyone in the audience, have you had a more recent experience with a bookend courier? Anything you want to share about it? Any thoughts on it? Love to hear your feedback in the chat. Don't forget to change it to all panelists and attendees so everyone can see your response.
Yes, please do. Very interested to hear from you. And also with regards to the next one, making art fair shipping sustainable, artists and galleries call for change. So that was the webinar in which we had DAX. We had Mark, who is a representative from DAX on the webinar. We also had an artist, Sarah Staton, as well as Simon Hornby from Crozier, and also Chris Bentley from AXA Excel Art. And so that was quite an interesting one. It was largely about sea freight in particular. And so another stat to throw out at you is that sea freight is generally 95 or 96% lower carbon footprint compared with air. And there is a case study that we can send you if you're interested, which was with Cadogan Tate and Gary Hume. It was, you may remember in the media last year, Gary Hume was asked to judge the National Portrait Gallery's BP Portrait Awards, and he was like, what, BP still, really? And so that was in the media a lot, and he thought he better not send his art exhibition that was about to go from London to New York by air while he was in the media complaining about sustainability. So he switched to sea, and they saved a lot of carbon as well. So I'm just going to go with him for a second.
So yeah, I mean, kind of speaking of this topic, I think because we're kind of moving into sustainability, I'm going to move over to our sustainability topics. So we had a number of topics for sustainability, or we had other ones that also related to it. I think this was a big theme for last year. Of course, we had the COP26. Which you can see here is we had a COP26 highlights event. which Annika did for ArtEvolve on how to make sure art goes green. We had the sustainable buildings, reducing energy and carbon costs in culture, as well as how to calculate your organization's environmental footprint. So Annika, do you want to say something about the sustainable buildings event?
Sure. Yeah. So that, I think, is one of the webinars that I probably quote the most, actually, in chatting with people, because it was really interesting. I don't know about you, but for myself, for a long time, I was really wishing that there was some way, somehow, someone could quantify how much savings you would actually have by adopting the green climate control protocols like BISOIT. And this was, very kind of top of mind when thinking about how to kind of move forward with getting people to do this. And so thank you very much to Keith, Ezra, Sam Anderson Architects, because they found that out for us. They did a computer simulation based on about 20 years of client data. They are a architectural firm that works with museums based in the US. And they found that it was actually 24 to 34%, depending on whether you have a historic or a modern building, that you could, stand to save in terms of your energy bill, which is, really a great stat. That in terms of your Paris Agreement targets will really push the needle. Here is the reason that I care so much about sustainability.
That's a good reason.
To ask me something. And so, Mackenzie, would you mind reading off the next thing? I'll be right back.
Yeah, of course. So this next one, actually, how to calculate your organization's environmental footprint, was another really popular webinar that we had this past year. And this was actually with James Quicker, who's from Queen's Fine Art. And they created, or they actually worked with GCC. They, used this calculator to actually calculate the organization's environmental footprint. They went through this whole process of doing that, and something they actually plan on doing every year going forwards, which I thought was really interesting and a great commitment to make. They found immediately some ways to cut some of the emissions that they had, and they found some other kind of longer term ways that they could continue to work on things year over year. Yeah, and I think it kind of showed you in a very concrete way, and you can actually see if you go back to the recording of that webinar and the assets that we give you with it. James really walked us through, how to do this in a way that can be manageable, right? Even if you don't have like a sustainability department or even a sustainability person, you can still manage to do something, right? You can make some sort of calculation that you can use to inform your decision making for 2022 and beyond. So,
and that is another good point, is that one of the things that's really important for organizations to meet their sustainability objectives is to bake this into the DNA of their organization, and to on the one hand, perhaps have people who are dedicated to sustainability within their organization, but also to embed it into their teams, more generally. It's kind of like technology, right? You don't just have like one person anymore in an organization that deals with digitization or technology. It's just like embedded throughout. Everyone, everywhere has to deal with technology now. And that really ought to be the same thing in the future with sustainability. But one thing that you can do as a first step, if you can't afford, if you don't have the bandwidth, you can't afford to have somebody dedicated to it, whatever it might be, is to engage with Key Culture, because they have a really great Key Futures program, which we just participated in the pilot of, it's basically a community, a platform where you can share your success stories and your projects, where you can learn more about all of the different aspects of sustainability and social justice, and how you can engage with those, what to be thinking about. They have a lot of resource books and manuals. It's a really great resource, and it's something really worth looking into. That's a relatively low cost thing for an organization to engage with, to put some structure around how to become more green.
And then, of course, we had the, after your time at COP26, Annika, we had that highlights event where both you and I were on there, actually, along with Kate Rosser-Frost from DAX. I quite liked that one. I thought that was a very fiery and positive discussion looking towards the future. So yeah, why don't you tell us a little bit, just looking back on COP26 now in January?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that it was really great to have Kate, and we did a co-briefing together, which was really, a nice thing to put together. DAX has been working more recently on engaging with the government and lobbying on behalf of their membership of artists, which is about 100,000 strong. And traditionally, they work on artist copyright and resale right, but they know that a lot of their artists are very passionate about sustainability, and that they want to start to work on lobbying in this area as well. And they're planning a series of events in the springtime about sustainability and helping to educate their artist membership group on kind of what they can do, right? So I'm really hopeful that this is going to help push the needle from an education point of view. But one of the things that we talked about was, COP26 general insights. What did we achieve? What did we not achieve? And some of my insights were in terms of like the cultural element, right? And also generally, and like how does that fit into the larger picture? So one of the interesting insights that I had was from the CEO of Ericsson, and they have managed to, in a talk that I saw that he did, they have actually reduced their carbon footprint as an organization of 100,000 staff by 70% already.
Wow.
And he said, it wasn't so hard because we all, and it's not going to be that hard for any of you, because actually our excess is so great. Our amount of wastage is so huge that actually cutting that back by half is not so hard, which is like a weird, interesting
a nice perspective.
kind of perspective.
It's a good way to look at it. Right?
I agree.
Yeah.
So yeah, another interesting thing from the platform that it gave me the opportunity to give my presentation at COP26. They are a Swedish-based social media platform that is dedicated to sustainability called We Don't Have Time. And I really recommend them as a resource for really great, free broadcasting on and presentations on various sustainability topics and aspects. And I thought that their one on circular economies was particularly, really interesting and insightful. And we talked about how it's so important to have the right balance between, taking it seriously, but not just making people feel, overwhelmed and like there's no hope. So you need to give people hope. And that, finding that right balance is something that they work really hard at, because apathy is basically, our biggest enemy. If we get to the point where people are just like, oh, well, it's too late, which my little brother in New York was saying that the media basically had told him this years ago, even before pre-COVID. And I just thought, well, shame on you, US media, because it's not too late.
Yeah.
And we don't have to just concern ourselves with what China are doing. We can take the first step ourselves. So I think that those are all kind of general insights from the COP. And I know that there was a lot of people that were disappointed that, we didn't reach all of the agreements to avoid, 1.5 degree shift in the future. Personally, I think it was maybe a little bit naive to think that, this COP would do everything that was necessary to reach that, to achieve that agreement, that level of agreement. But I do think that we took, massive steps in the right direction. And that was really exciting to see. And from the point of view of why culture, you know, what the really important thing from culture's point of view is to tell the story. Because everyone was saying to me at COP26, we need to make people feel the need. You know, it's one thing to be a scientist and to tell them stats and give them figures and stuff about this. We've been doing that for 20 years till we're blue in the face. What we really need is to make people feel the need. And museums and the arts, you know, musicians, writers, poets, we all are the storytellers of society and really help society process and think about the future. And so I think that, you know, that is the critical role that culture can have potentially in this next decade. They're calling the decade of change, is to help, you know, be the storytellers telling the story of taking action. And so that's my big hope for the culture sector, is that we fulfill that really important role, and that we do it with credibility, which means transitioning to more sustainable practices ourselves.
Yeah, definitely. So let's talk a little bit about e-commerce and the art market. We had a couple events with this. One was Selling Art Online with Frank McDermott from Caravan. And then we also had Making Art Accessible, New Ways to Enjoy and Collect Art, which was with a whole panel of people, actually. We had Will Jarvis at Gertrude, Julian Singleman at Parlor, Paul Becker at Art Money. I think that was a great one that also had, I think our stand-in hosts on that were Emma and Stacy. So that was a whole big group of people. So yeah, Annika, I think you did the one with Frank, right? So you want to talk about that?
I did, and so that was quite interesting. Caravan are the company that managed Gagosian's e-commerce site, so they know what they're talking about. Yeah. If anyone does, and he had some really great kind of tips for, you know, again, kind of starting basic, right? And, you know, not taking your first steps and not feeling like you have to, you know, engage a super high-end, you know, kind of agency like themselves. Although he also did say that, you know, he was willing to kind of chat to anyone about, you know, their e-commerce needs. But he also talked about Shopify, you know, just like getting a Shopify site up and running. You can do that quite quickly. And so, you know, you can kind of start where you are, and you can use, there are so many tools out there now for e-commerce, for, you know, general industries, and these really can be utilized by the art market, increasingly so, more and more so. I think that people had the impression, you know, 5 or 10 years ago that what we're doing is so niche and so, you know, special or different, that you needed to have your own custom site, your own custom inventory system, your own custom this, your own custom that. And I think that nowadays that just isn't true. You know, there are systems which are specialized for the art market, you know, like ArtLogic and Artea, and, you know, there's lots of inventory management systems and website, you know, OVRs and things. But there's also, you know, more general ones. If your price, if your budget is lower, then that will afford as well, such as Shopify. So yeah, there's lots of options, and there's also lots of resources in terms of expertise. And I believe that Caravan's site also might have some like ebooks and things with different tips on e-commerce as well. So that's also worth checking out.
Oh yeah, great. So we then had that large event that was with our colleagues Emma and Stacy, and that seemed like a really interesting one. You know, and both Annika and I think were sick on that day, and so neither of us were able to attend. Stacy and Emma did a wonderful job. And yeah, I think the collection or the discussion kind of also from these different perspectives, because we don't often have 3 different organizations besides Articheck on an ArtEvolve event. So I think that was really nice, and, you know, was very active discussion kind of on those. And it's definitely one to check out if, you know, you kind of want to look at what are the new ways that art is being collected and shared and enjoyed. So yeah, I think that's a great one to check out.
Well, I will also say that, I mean, I wasn't in that one, but I have had lots of conversations with all of the people that were. So I know, about their businesses and kind of what they're trying to achieve. And I think that Gertrude and Parlor, from the point of view of like renting art, that's a really interesting idea and model. And the fact that they're making it accessible for a much more kind of entry level audience. I think that the price point for one of them starts at quite, I don't want to say a number in case I get it wrong, but like quite low.
Reasonable. Yeah.
Quite reasonable, quite affordable.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's really interesting. And I know that Art Money as well, that is a really interesting company who's really facilitates a lot of people to get into collecting, if they wish, because essentially it's like the Klarna, you have in the retail space of the art world. So you can spread out your payments for any artwork purchase over, and it's something which galleries sign up to, they pay the fees. So as the customer, you're just like 0%, spreading your payments out into 5 or 10 or however many payments. And so if you're thinking to yourself, oh, I really love this piece that's, maybe a little bit outside of what kind I can afford to pay in, one chunk. But if I were able to, it's like buying furniture or whatever, it's nice. Or that piano behind me, right? Yeah. I spread that out into 10 payments. Yeah. So yeah, I think that that's a really interesting thing for the art market. And a lot of these things, as a kind of trend that we've talked about before with technological products, is really democratizing. And I think that that's a wonderful, thing, a wonderful thing heading into the future, that we are making art more accessible to a wider audience is a great thing.
Definitely. Okay, so here's our last topic before we look at, what all of y'all are going to be focusing on in 2022 with our last poll, which is professional art community and networking. So I think both of these were me. So making meaningful connections with the art community online was with the founders of Art Mavens, Louise and Deborah. And that was a really nice conversation about kind of how up until now, the art world has been, creating their communities and creating their networks, and what's been lacking in those spaces, and how Art Mavens is trying to sort of create a new online space for the art community, and obviously at a very important time during the pandemic. So I think that was a really nice conversation. And I definitely recommend checking out Art Mavens. That's, if you kind of want to have that kind of more close community, especially if you're still working from home, or maybe working partially remotely or remotely for foreseeable future. We also have, of course, the webinar that we had with Doug Milford, where we were talking about kind of his experience in kind of watching the innovations of the art world over the last 30 years. And that was really interesting as well. And then, of course, we have the last post-pandemic hiring in the art world, which was with Carlina at Art Frankly. And I think that was kind of eye-opening in the sense of, any of us who come into the art world from other industries will see, LinkedIn is kind of the end-all be-all of creating professional profiles and looking for jobs and things like that. And for the art world, it's not even close, right? Many people don't even have a profile on LinkedIn in the art world, or they have one that just has their name and nothing else, right? No other information. And so, Carlina was kind of talking about how do we hire, especially now that there is like a great need for a lot of positions right now. There's a lot of competition in terms of being able to hire good candidates. Where do you find them, right? Where do you go looking for them? How do you kind of, get those people? How do you reach them, remotely via the internet? So I thought that was really good. And if anybody is looking to hire anytime this year, I'd recommend checking out that webinar, because there were some very good recommendations from Carlina about kind of how to handle hiring in post-pandemic world.
Cool. Well, yeah, and it's I wonder why that is, that people don't have aren't so engaged with LinkedIn. I
It
am.
used to be. Yeah, I know. But so I guess Carlene actually went into it in the webinar. And it's really interesting. It's because in the beginning, it used to be that you only had a certain list of professions you could choose from, and you couldn't write in your own on LinkedIn. It was just a drop down list. And they did not have a single one relating to the art world. And so people just didn't create profiles because they couldn't even put like, you know, a generic like, you know, art professional or something. There was nothing. And so people didn't create profiles initially. And I think it took LinkedIn a long time to make categories for it. They were kind of behind the ball on that. And so, yeah, people just didn't make profiles because there was no way for them to identify their work.
I have to say that it has been a good resource for me in terms of, you know, extending my network and meeting different professionals, you know, through the connections and different degrees of connections and everything, and kind of understanding the makeup of large organizations and what the different roles are, which is also a real difficult challenge in the art world, because it's like no organization is structured the same, unfortunately. Everything seems to be unique.
Yep. So I'm going to put up this poll. Here's our last poll if anyone would like to participate. So this is, which of these topics are you looking at focusing on in 2022? Ones that you maybe did focus on in 2021 are looking to continue? Are there ones that you didn't have a chance to get into in 2021 and would like to this year? Which of these topics are you looking at kind of diving into this year that you would really like to focus on, either for your own, you know, personal development, your professional development, your organization's development? It'd be great to hear what you're thinking about.
Yeah.
You can mark as many of them as you'd like.
Yeah, interesting. I wonder what people are wanting to focus on this year.
Yeah. And once people have answered, I'm just gonna, while people are answering this, Carly, I noticed you had a question about, has there ever been a dealer who can finalize their art fair list in time to use C-Freight? Yes, in a variety of ways. If that's something you'd like to talk about further, feel free to pop us an email. And reach out to Annika at architect.com. She can give you a bit more info about that.
Yes, but it is a challenge. You have identified a real concern, especially now because of the world, you know, supply chain crisis. And so it is particularly challenging at the moment, but where there is demand, there will be supply. And so as long as we keep engaging with it, it will get better. And
definitely.
So, yeah, but we are happy to talk about that in more detail.
Yeah, definitely. It looks like the biggest thing that people want to focus on is shipping and art movement, because of course with Omicron, I think this has come up again as something really important. And then we also have, you know, sustainability, collection care, which is, you know, very important, something that we also would love to focus on. So if that's something you need some assistance with, feel free to reach out. And
yeah, you know, can I just say about collection care that I feel like, and this is just my anecdotal evidence, so, you know, maybe I just wasn't aware of it, but I really thought that the pandemic was like an opportunity for people to focus more inwardly on their collections. And it didn't seem like that happened as much as I would have liked to have seen. But again, maybe it's just because it was behind closed doors and I wasn't aware of it. But
I think some of it too is people not being allowed to go into on site in some cases.
Certainly, right? That was an issue, I'm sure. But I know that there were periods where like they were allowed to go on site, but the public wasn't allowed to be there.
Maybe. Yeah.
So that seems like it would have been a great time for collection care. Oh, hold on. I think
Deborah's saying I think some of that is a function of not having enough staff. So some staff were maybe not on, even if there were some who were in the office.
Furloughed or even let go because of restructuring. So yeah. Well, one of the things also that we wanted to ask about was if anyone is planning on doing more local lending next year, if that is a thing now. Because I know that there was talk about that becoming a thing, and that a lot of people were just dealing with disrupted, blocked exhibitions and getting those through. And so now is the time when maybe local lending could become more of a thing. So curious to know if anybody.
Corolla. Carola is saying we're mostly busy rescheduling exhibitions last year.
Yeah. So from a conservator side, the public did keep bringing art in for treatment with more travel expenses redirected home. Yes, so that is an interesting point too. Yeah, we heard about that, and that's nice for the conservators. I'm glad to hear that. And for local lending, I think if that is becoming a thing for you guys, it would be interesting to hear from you. And also, I guess that will mean an increase in collections care required to deal with the increase of local lending. So, as a collections care professional, I would be glad to see that. And yeah, hope that's
definitely. All right. Well, I think we're going to wrap up here. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We will make sure to include links to all the webinars that we've discussed in our wrap up for you. So you can kind of access any of those if you want to watch them in more detail, or you just want to check out the summaries of them, the written summaries for more information. And thank you so much for joining us today. And we will see you in a few weeks for our next ArtEvolve.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
Goodbye.
Thanks, Annika. Bye.